In this lesson, we're going to learn how to multiply decimals using grids. I'm going to start with my first example of 6/10 times 2/10. I'm going to start by modeling 6/10 on the grid. And since it's my first number, I'm going to choose to model it vertically. So up and down, I know that each row is a tenth. So I'm going to shade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm looking at these as 6 full rows. So there are my 6/10. For 2/10, I'm going to shade this horizontally. And basically, when I was looking at each of these rows, I was looking them as a whole row. And so now that I'm taking 2/10 of 6/10, it's like I'm taking each of these rows, splitting it into 2 pieces, or 10 pieces, and I'm going to take 2 of them. So I'm going to take 2 from the first column, 2 from the second, the third, and basically a faster and more efficient way of doing this is I can just shade 2 rows of 10 horizontally. So now, to get my answer using the grid, I'm going to count the number of squares that I have shaded. And I know that each square is worth 1/100th. And if I count, I should have 6 in this row and 12 total, which means my answer is 0 and 12 squares, which is 12/100ths. And I can check my answer by doing the multiplication algorithm. I know 2 times 6 is 12. 2 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1. And there are 2 numbers behind a decimal in the problem. So my answer is 0 and 12/100ths. So to make sure I get the correct answer using the grids, I need to only count the squares that had both red and blue shading. Let's try another model. So in our second example, we have 4/10 times 9/10. And once again, I'm going to start by modeling 4/10 up and down. So 1 row of 10th, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10. So my first number has been represented on the grid. Now I need to model 9/10, and I'm going to do this one side to side. And like I showed you in the first example, I could just count 9 boxes of each row, but it is faster to just go ahead and horizontally do 9 rows. Eight, 9 rows. Now I'm only going to count the squares that have both colors. And I can see that it goes about 4 over and 9 down. So I know 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, and 36. So 36 squares have both red and blue shaded. So my answer is 0 and 36/100ths. And once again, I can check it using my algorithm. 9 times 4 is 36. 9 times 0 is 0, plus 3 is 3. And my numbers, there are 2 behind the decimal. So my answer is 0 and 36/100ths. There are many other ways that you will see decimal multiplication used on hundreds grids. So we're going to try this third example, 5/10 times 3/10. So I'm going to shade the first number up and down, and this is just my personal preference. You can do the first one side to side if you choose. So since I did 5/10 vertically, I'm going to model 3/10 horizontally. 1, 2, 3. And now I'm going to count how many of these squares have both colors. So this is 5, 10, 15. And since I'm counting squares, I know this answer is 15 hundredths. Now let's try an example with a whole number. Once again, I'm going to start the problem by modeling the first number. So 1 and 7/10. So I know I am going to have to shade a whole grid. And I'm going to go into the second grid and model 7/10. 5, 6, 7. So now that my first number has been modeled, I'm going to model 4/10 horizontally. And I need to do that on both grids. So 1/10 here, 1/10 here, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. And I'm going to count how many have blue and red shaded. So I know this is 10, 20, 30, 40 hundredths in this grid. And then over here I have 7, 14, 21, 28 hundredths. And I can just add those two numbers together. Or if you were counting, you could have just counted 40 over here and 28 over here. 4 plus 2 is 6. So there are a total of 68 hundredths. And I will show you that it works the same way as the algorithm. 4 times 7 is 28. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is 6. There are two numbers behind the decimal. So my answer is 0 and 68 hundredths. Now let's look at how we model a decimal times a whole number on a hundreds grid. Now this is very similar to addition modeling, and I only need one color this time, although I'm going to use two different ones to show you. So I'm going to start with this first number, 2/10, and they want to see me write that 4 times. So 1/10, 2/10, that was me doing it once. 1/10, 2/10, that was twice. 2/10 again, that's 3 times, and 2/10 again, that's 4 times. So I have 4 groups of 2/10. So in order to find my total, I'm going to count how many grids I actually shaded. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 whole rows were shaded. And I know that rows are tenths. So my answer is 0 and 8 tenths. And like I said, I did two different colors, but I could have just done 2/10, 4/10, 6/10, 8/10, all in the same color, and just added on to my 2/10. In the next example, I have a very similar problem, except this time my first number is 2/100ths times 4. And I know 2/100ths means 2 little squares. So the only difference here is I'm going to do 2 squares once, 2 squares twice, 3 times, 4 times. And if I count how many of these squares were shaded, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hundredths. So my answer is 0 and 8 hundredths.